Security and resilience. One seems to suggest that it's a defensive mindset and resilience is some sort of reacting. What do you do when you need to react positively to some sort of breach? And is it possible? You know, we've heard an awful lot, and I think this carries on wonderfully from before, about the type of attacks that we're now subject to and the risks that we face. And interestingly, the word risk will come up later. It's something that we don't necessarily always consider hand in hand with the way that we make our decisions. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at why, and we're going to define resilience itself a little bit deeper. And then I'd like to look at some building blocks, and I'm going to put it to you that some of the agile and continuous delivery techniques are natural foundation elements to enable you to be able to construct a platform, not just for protection, because I don't actually think that there is actually any protection. You're going to be in a constant cat and mouse game now, henceforth. But what it will give you is the flexibility to be able to address things in a piecemeal fashion enough to be able to do damage limitation. This definition, it was the first definition I found when I was looking up cyber resilience. Now, cyber resilience is a bit different from cyber security. Cyber resilience is more of a way of thinking, and that way of thinking uses the tools and approaches of cyber security to try and keep the lights on. It's about bringing together ideas of business continuity and operational concerns mixed in with cybersecurity as your tool. The threats now are different. It's not just that there's more of them. It's not just that they're cleverer. It's the fact that we're seeing over the last 25 years, we have the internet. So there is now a global framework. On that global framework, we now, for the last 15 years, have cloud computing, which is an execution framework. And we now have the ability to execute and perform attacks on whoever our rivals might be in a way that we've never had before. And that means, therefore, that you have to think differently about the way that you're going to defend yourself. On top of that, we have the movement towards analytics, using machine learning, artificial intelligence. The technology's been around a long time, and it's only because we have available commoditized compute cost effectively available to us that we can now use artificial intelligence tools, and therefore your adversaries can use those tools against you. So this is the model that we've grown up with, the castle model. It's human nature, and we can't get away from how we naturally think as people. And we've grown up thinking that the way you protect yourself is to build walls around yourself. And the castle is the classic example of that. And we do it obviously in our day-to-day. We build houses, we lock windows, we lock doors. It's a natural thing for us to do. So when the internet and e-commerce and it became monetized and the use of computation across distances became established, we started to see the threats emerge. When we understood the threats, we started building walls. So with those walls came the ability to breach those defences. Now sometimes it might be a battering ram, and other times it might be very sort of subtle. So this is the traditional approach. It's something that we reported on in our Tech Radar a couple of years ago, that traditional approaches to security involve getting the people who know what they're talking about into a room with you and laying down the security recommendations. And they will do the risk analysis, they will give you the standards that you have to work to, and they will set out the requirements for whatever products you're building. Let's assume that these are a set of digital products. And they will then set the infrastructure standards and so forth. And then they'll come back at the end and they'll do a number of things, including auditing and penetration testing and so forth. But in the meantime, what's happened? Anything could have happened, anything's changed, and you don't know the amount of risk that you've actually been addressing throughout that process because you've got no way of monitoring that risk throughout that process. So no one is actually taking care of security throughout that process. Now, there are cases where some people will come and do checks, but there are cases where people do wait until people meet some form of standard. Now, there's two problems with that. One is that what happens when the standard isn't met and you have to go and your product is delayed. And the second problem is there are new zero-day attacks every day. So we need to change the way we think about security. We have to build this almost social model of responsibility, that security has to be everybody's responsibility in one form or another. Now, where we have the problem where we have an organisation and we have the IT department, and within IT we have the specialisms. So there might be risk, there might be compliance, there might be security and so forth. That those people will come and decree, move away, and then come back and check that you've met their standard. They're not working with you, there's no collaboration, there's no community. So what we have to do is be able to create a model, an operating model, where people work together. So the key message today is that everybody's responsible. That's easy to say, we could send out a memo. You're all responsible, hey. But actually, to be absolutely responsible, it needs to be part of your operating model. So people actually have responsibilities and know what to do to escalate, know what to do to check for, know what not to do. Obviously, you're subject to direct attacks. You have to worry about the privacy and the transparency of your data. So you're now responsible for the data that you have. But in order for you to be responsible for your data, you need to know where and how it's used. Now, GDPR says that you should know where and how your data is used. But most people don't follow GDPR in anything other than some form of lip service. And they're hoping sincerely that they're naturally not audited because they're going for the bigger fish. But how do you control the data that isn't in your systems? So you create your products, you sell stuff online, or people talk about you, you offer a service, and that information is out there on social media. It might be something on TripAdvisor if you're in the hoteling business. It could be anything where information about you is talked about externally. What's that got to do with your castle model? Nothing. And there's nothing you can do about it. So can you control the conversations? So some people try to use some form of sentiment analysis to get out there, be in the conversation, to try and combat difficult problems. The amount of issues that we see with supermarkets, especially with deliveries, where somebody gets some really terrible service, so they tweet about it, and all of a sudden they get a response. Now that wouldn't have been the case with phone up customer services because of that issue we talked about earlier in the questions. Nobody gets to know about some of these things. If it's out there, you've got no control of it. So you've got the data that you've got within your organisation, which you would look at as your data, or the data that you've derived value from, that you've pulled from outside. And then you've got the data that's out in the external world, that you've got no control over at all. And these things are happening all over the world. And I think that just to reinforce the someone who's more intelligent out there, that machine learning being so easily available now and so easily adaptable is being seen more and more as probably the biggest threat. You may have expected me to talk about things that do behavioural differences and policy tracking and so forth. These are all good tools. There's nothing wrong with the use of intrusion detection systems and so forth. But what I'm trying to spell out to you is that it's a question of when, not if. So we need to think differently about the way we're responsible about it and the way we defend and keep the business running. So we're running through a period where the underlying thing, we talked about the internet, we talked about the prevalence of cloud. Technology is changing fast. So this is an example of processor execution time, how much your processor is working for you. And it's the often used Moore's law. Now, there are people that will extrapolate Moore's law out. Ray Kurzweil extrapolates it out to 100 years, looks at the very beginnings of mechanical computing over the last 100 years, goes right the way up to now, and says that you can actually track that exponentially. And now we're at the point where the end of Moore's law. We're just at the point where, whether you look at it from 100 years or whether this goes from the late 70s, we're at the point where many people consider, and this is something I'm now buying into more and more, that we're at the point where we're about to hit one of those other S-curves. And we've come to the end of something which is just a physical constraint. There are other approaches that are coming that are going to create a difference in threat and also opportunity. So things are going to change for the better in some senses, and what we can do is more powerful and more diverse, but the types of attacks need to be considered as a pair. So if we just look at this, you can see here along the side, the blue, the internet and social and mobile and data analytics, as these are sort of foundational elements. Once those foundational elements have become established, we get the things in green which can grow from them. 3D printing, renewable energy, Internet of Things, cognitive systems, nanotechnologies. Then we see this growth into layers upon layers of platforms growing upon platforms that enable other things. And I think with the fact that the cloud now exists and is now commoditized, the fact that machine learning is available on there, we're fast approaching an era where the platform, the internet, that was then enabled the platform of cloud computing, which enables the ability to construct artificial intelligence meshes and so forth. And on that, we have a number of things that are going to come in terms of innovation in the next few years. So back to resilience. This is a document that was issued 5 years ago by the Department of Homeland Security in America, in the US. The key point here is that it talks at the end about that the comparison to cybersecurity, cyber resilience requires the business to think differently and to be more agile on handling attacks. So it means agile in the dictionary definition of the term. It means that you need to be more responsive. But believe me, I've worked in just about every intractable organisation like you guys do, that you just can't consider how you can make things work any quicker than they do, because the organisational structures, the politics, everything is set in stone to such an extent that to get a change in place, it feels like you're moving the building to an inch to the left, brick by brick. So continuous delivery is something that we've talked about in Thoughtworks for the last decade. We were there having conversations with people at the start of the DevOps movement, and you may think that this is a set of instructions, a method, an approach that is simply to do with deploying software into production. It isn't. If you're a digital business, your products are the things that are deployed into production. So the ideas or the responses to change or the security breaches, whatever it is that comes as a stimulus into the system, needs to be handled in a way where it can be analysed quickly enough and delivered into a process that's predictable. So you need to be able to get it analysed, get it delivered to the people that are going to write the appropriate software within your digital product suite to make the changes, get it tested, and get the appropriate people in a room that can actually do the analysis at the right time. So this will probably involve a complete change in the way your company organisational structure works. How do we get the right people in a room to work together? So it's very easy to think about this in the isolated sense. Oh, it's a problem, so we'll just get the right people, get the risk guy, get the compliance guy, and then maybe get them to talk to the CISO or one of his delegates, and then work with the delivery team. If you're not doing that every day or on some regular basis, then you are not going to be responsive enough, because you're going to get so many these things thrown at you that these isolated cases are going to become the norm. So you need a way of deconstructing some of your organisational structures and your political lines such that collaborative teams can be deployed, if not already exist all the time, to come together to create a whole life cycle management for your digital products. This is from an article that I wrote a year or so ago on the lean security cycle. And we have to start thinking in cycles. So agile is about breaking things down into little chunks and getting the appropriate quality assurance in place. Get the right thinking ahead of time, but just enough. Do the work, do the testing. So you build up this bank of knowledge and testing and an ability to react to change because you've got that sort of like set of Lego bricks for your entire estate. Now, if you get something that you find a breach that occurs, so your detection systems find something, then you need to go into response and recovery as quick as you possibly can. So you get the people together, you swarm to get to the response and the recovery time because you've put the fix into place. Your continuous delivery pipeline gets that into production because you've already got that process in place that's delivering software. And we've got tools that are actually automatically doing security testing in place. This gets that stuff done automatically. And then you can start to think at somewhat in leisure how you would prevent it. That might be a policy change. But you need to start thinking more in terms of lean business cycles and eliminating waste. And that enables you to use the continuous delivery building blocks. But this is just another take on the same issue, that we have to be able to go around in a cycle of design, work out who does what, where we deploy it, and then how we deploy it to production, and then how we manage a continuous security cycle. So continuous security, I could be talking about compliance, continuous compliance. It could be continuous anything. As long as we have that idea of breaking things up into pieces, putting the appropriate QA around them, and putting the appropriate tests in place that can be executed in an automated fashion as far as we possibly can, it means we build up that bank of quality and safety over time. So the potential bottlenecks to this are that we might not have the capability. So we need to think about this from a wider point of view. Who needs to be trained in what? What expertise do we need to have? How do we bring people together? What are the actual operating model changes that we need to do to bring people together to work together for the first time? We need to put those practices in place, and we need to have the tools that are appropriate, and we need not to standardise on those tools. We need to have de rigueur or de facto standards that we use for a while, and when they don't fit anymore, you throw them away. So the whole idea of standardisation, of tooling, of software, of techniques and skills is wrong. Everyone in software has said, build it once, deploy it in many places. If you think about the human body and defence against the virus, then one of the natural solutions to recovering from a virus or some form of attacker is diversity. So your body will naturally start to change the way cells actually are constructed, or the defensive walls on cells. Because if something was to come in and be able to damage one cell, it would kill them all. So diversity is a natural defense. And people are now starting to turn towards natural sciences and complexity as a way of thinking about the way we need to think about the future, because it's just getting too hard to think about, too hard to discuss and manage. In order to try and work out what we need to do first, we need to have risk as a first-class citizen in our tool chain. Most people, when they approach risk, they will look at a framework, get some expertise in, and they will have a qualitative approach to risk. So they'll think, what are all the things I need to worry about? And then they'll put some sort of severity rating on them, 1 to 10. And then they'll look at the frequency of which they think they predict that might occur, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. And then they'll roll up those things into some sort of number, and that's your risk score. Some of them are a bit clever and they'll have some sort of statistical weighting attached to it, and some of them are quite simplistic. But the problem is that guesswork to get to the qualitative value, the severity of 1 to 10, is a guess. So when you get a bunch of guesses and roll them up into an aggregate guess, you're miles away from knowing what actually is the risk or how to quantify that risk. You have to be able to look at something and say, well, how much is it going to cost me? And the only way we can do that is by starting to introduce things like probability. So what's the probability of a potential loss that would occur at a particular point in time? And if this happened, how much would it cost me? So we start to use other types of models to say, well, that would be the reputational damage. This is the direct costs, and so forth. And then the quantitative models that we use can start to give us a feel for how much it's actually going to cost us. So you need to maintain a balance of acceptable risk. So again, you can't just lock everything down and just come out of here and say, oh, I need to control everything, everything needs to be locked down. we've got to have a sensible approach to how we do this, and that needs to be attached to value. We have to think about things in terms of an impact assessment. What data is stored? What's the reason for storing it? And this takes us back, all of this is very similar to what we were supposed to be doing for GDPR. Well, we were supposed to be constructing data privacy impact assessments. So from the point of view of privacy, that was a walk through all your data, who owns what, where is it, what am I going to do with it, how do I get rid of it? What's the linkage between all these bits of data? And that's physical as well as digital. And many of these things are very much the same. If you're thinking about threat and risk, you need to do a threat model. What's the threat? Where are the bits in the system? What are the potential things that are going to attack it? Which brings us to the only approach that seems to be elevating now as a replacement from the just build the high walls around it, and that's the zero trust model. Zero trust was a term coined by Forrester around 2010, and it's pretty simple really. It's a perimeterless enterprise. So theoretically there's no walls. In practice there are still many of the same tools that you have in place, but the idea is that everything is potentially external. So if we take the idea of the castle and we say, well, let's take the castle and make lots of little castles inside the castle, then that's, and remove the outer one, that's more the approach. So how do we do this in an agile way? Well, one of the things that we talk about is being able to construct these small work units and deliver them, but we also talk about delivering small pieces of software. And those small pieces of software are things that we can individually manage so that we can put protection pieces around them. We can put the appropriate authorization and authentication around them, for example, as opposed to having one at the external. So it changes the way you have to think about the granularity of what you're doing. So just to finish, the end of simplicity. Everything is now more complicated, so we need to think about the nature of how we think of problems. Historically, we've thought about reducing problems down to their simplest element and solving each one. It's reductionism. But we're now finding that things happen, you know, the old expression, the sum is greater than the parts. We're seeing emergent behaviour that's resulting. So all our distributed systems, or all these moving parts within our organisation or enterprise, certain behaviour can happen as a sort of a perfect storm of events that's hard to reproduce, that becomes very difficult. And this is where machine learning externally can start to harvest some of these things and start to feed in some of these chaos scenarios into your environment. That's the sort of changing nature of the way we need to think about our sort of approach to security, that we need to think about the fact that it is now potentially something that is like a complex adaptive system. That we need to start thinking about how all those small pieces that we deployed, how they talk and how we've protected them, when they all work together in concert, this happens. So how do we protect against this? And it's those things that we can protect some of in scenarios and some of in a completely different way that we need to think about, and we don't know until we get there because it's emergent behaviour. So we have to have this constant iterative approach to investigation, to solving and fixing and moving on. But trust me, you're constantly going to be fighting a losing battle.